We're into the semi-finals of the FIDE World Cup knockout tournament. So, just 4 players left from 206 players at the start. So what are they playing for? Well, let's look at the prize money. 4th place will receive 50,000 US dollars. 3rd place, 60,000 US dollars. Runner-up gets 85,000 and the winner will get a cool $120,000. That's not bad. And of course, there are 3 spots in the 2026 Candidates Tournament up for grabs. So the tragedy is one of these players is going to miss out. It's really tough. So let's look at the pairings. We've got Javakir Sendarov from Uzbekistan, 19 years old, playing against his compatriot Noribek Yakubayev, 23 years old. They're pretty close in rating. One is 22nd in the world, one is 32 in the world. They know each other extremely well. I mean, that's just too close to call, basically. The other semi-final, I think we have a clear favourite there, to my eyes anyway. Wei Yi from China. Now, he's been rated over 2,700 for 10 years. He's a class act. And, yeah, near the top 10, basically. I mean, I think what's his current rating? Yeah, he's in the top 10 in the world. 26 years old. His opponent, Andrei Esipenko from Russia, playing under the FIDE flag. 23 years old. He's rising fast, but he's never been over 2,700. So, to my eyes, the Chinese player is a clear favourite there. But by this stage, it's just too close to call. In the previous round against Sam Shankland, Esipenko was very impressive. His strategic understanding is excellent, and he's obviously has really strong nerves as well. So it's just very open. I'd like to show you the game between Wei Yi and Andrei Esipenko. This was, well, both games were extremely tense. But this one finished with a bang. So here we go. Wei Yi against Andrei Esipenko. Game 1 from the semi-final. Wei Yi had white. He played e4. And the first surprise in the game. Now in this tournament, Esipenko has been playing e5. With different kinds of the Spanish. But today he played the French. And, I mean, he has played the French before, but in this position, instead of, let's say, knight f6, which he has played, he simply took on e4 and then played knight d7. So this is, I never know whether this is the Bern variation or the Rubinstein. They're very, very similar. It's the same pawn structure, basically. So it's a modest system, but it's a very solid system. Black has a really good pawn structure. You're behind the first 3 ranks for the first few moves, but black can also counterattack in the middle. Knight f6. Yep, the knights support each other. And, well, before playing knight f3, Wei Yi had thought for 11 minutes. So clearly he was taken by surprise. And that's a good thing. At least for Esipenko. So his prep has worked. It's a very decent system. It can't go too badly wrong, basically. And for white, let me just go back one move. For white, it's quite tricky. You have to decide, where does this bishop belong? D3 or C4? Do you want to castle queenside or kingside? You know, these are fundamental questions that are not easy to answer. Where he goes bishop d3 and now c5. So black does have counterplay here. You know, for white, as I said, I think it's harder to pick a clear strategy in a way. For black, it's a lot simpler. You want to attack the centre with c5. Okay, tick, job done. But also, you need to bring this bishop into play. Now, it might get to the long diagonal via b6 and bishop b7, or it might come to d7 and then c6. Depends how white plays. Bishop e3 played, supporting d4, and probably looking to castle queenside. Queen c7, no need to take on d4 yet. And the queen is actually well placed on c7. Supports the pawn, occupies a good diagonal, and it's possible that black is looking to castle queenside. Depends how white sets up. Well, with queen e2, I think it's probably clear that Wei Yi is looking to castle queenside. a6, yeah, stops a potential check here. And now Wei Yi thought for 15 minutes. And his move was rather mysterious. h4. It's mysterious until you switch the computer on, and it's the top move of strong programs, basically. But it's still quite a mysterious move to me, I have to say. I mean, h4 can be a good move in general, perhaps to advance or as far as possible. It might support a knight here. It could even be that this rook comes into play. I mean, who knows? But its purpose isn't clear at this moment. Of course, it's possible just to castle kingside or queenside. Okay, h4 played. And Esipenko played knight d5. So looking to hassle the bishop. And Wei Yi didn't bother moving it. I mean, in a way, yeah, if it came back, then, you know, black always has knight f4 anyway to pick off one of the bishops. So castles. Bishop d7. And king b1. This apparently is a novelty. It looks like a pretty standard move. The computer likes knight g5, and it certainly is a bit more testing for black. Simply because it prevents castling queenside. And you never know, it might bounce back into the middle. King b1 played. And judging by how much time they were both taking, I suspect they were both on their own at this stage, out of their preparation. So this one is still potentially an interesting move for white, looking at these pawns. So f6, which looks a little bit drafty. Obviously, it prevents the knight hitting these squares. But actually, it's fine. I mean, it means that black is not going to castle kingside. Those light squares look too weak. But he does castle queenside. And actually, it's pretty safe. So we're out of the opening. Both sides have castled. What's going on? Well, black is modestly placed here with these pawns. White has some space. But what can white actually do with that space? There are two bishops here. Although they're not sort of striking down some wonderful diagonal at the moment, they both have potential. And white has to be extremely careful in how he releases the position. Because if you get it wrong, those bishops can dominate. So Wei Yi pushed on with g5. Now, if that's taken, of course, that's very pleasant for white. Nice semi-open file for the rook, potentially a nice square here. Of course, black doesn't take. Esipenko just tucked his king away on a dark square. That's important. There's no dark square bishop, so the king is much safer on b8. It's not clear to me what Wei Yi has achieved with this advance. And in fact, I really like the way Esipenko handled this. He just popped the bishop back. So very often bishops are best on their starting squares, actually. You know, you often see rook e8 and then bishop on e7 back to f8. So just giving the rook a little bit more influence here. And Wei Yi decided to take on f6 after a 9-minute think. I don't know about that move, actually. Because I think it opens up possibilities for black, as we're going to see. c3 played, so super solid. So he's sort of creating a bulwark against this dark square bishop. That's the dangerous piece, the dark square bishop, because it doesn't have an opponent. And if it gets a good diagonal, then black could be doing extremely well. But that's why Wei Yi has set up like this, super solid, just preventing that bishop looking down a diagonal. So, rook g8. Now that's why I'm not sure about the exchange on f6, because actually this is a very useful avenue of counterattack for black. Knight d2. Okay, so this was his plan. You know, there was a point to exchanging on f6. So this is attacked, and it could be attacked again. So f5 played. But that, and that does, you know, weaken some squares here, perhaps. But actually, you know, I think black is pretty happy here because that rook is going to land on g4, hassling the h-pawn. Knight b3 played. So keeping an eye on this pawn. And I think Wei Yi had already envisaged what was coming. So rook g4, yep, black has counterplay. Rook h4, I like this a lot. So not only keeping an eye on this pawn, but also potentially looking to come in on h2, hassling the queen. Nicely played by Esipenko. As I mentioned in the introduction, I was very impressed by his strategic understanding when he played against Shankland and in other games here. You really feel that this is a kind of legacy of the old Soviet school of chess, where, you know, it's very correct the way they played. You know, you're positionally very responsible. Now, what's going on here? Well, what about if white decides to exchange off that active rook? Well, after e5, I think black could be better here. Position is starting to open up, and those bishops look good. You know, a position like this, well, e3 could be a target. And if this is taken, then, you know, those pawns have some potential. Okay, what else is there? Okay, what about e4? Well, that failed tactically. So this, and rook h2, and out of the blue, white is losing a piece. Can't interpose it with a rook. It's an exchange, and then queen takes bishop. And if queen d3, then f takes e4. White loses a piece. Queen takes bishop. So Wei Yi, after almost a 10-minute think, compromised. He took on c5. And after this, I mean, he didn't really want to give up that nice strong point on d4, but he has got rid of that dark squared bishop, which always has potential, and he's seen that this is a good move. Rook f4. Of course, you don't want to take here. Then, you know, positionally it doesn't look right. That backward e pawn. So rook h3, attacking here, and rook d4. So this is Wei Yi's idea. He's coordinated very well. His pieces look good. So instead of taking here, which would straighten out the pawns, rook g8. Yeah, these rooks look pretty good. But e4 gets rid of that weak pawn on e3. An exchange, and queen takes e4. Now, there is a loose pawn here, queen takes h5, and that kind of connects the major pieces. But Wei Yi had clearly anticipated this, and he came up with, I should probably have a think and drink moment, but I've got another one planned for later on. Bishop takes a6. It's a good move. So if pawn takes bishop, rook b4 check is actually winning. So king c7, queen c4 leads to mate. And king a7, can you spot it? Rook d7 and queen b7 mate. Okay, so that's a bit of a shocker. So what had Esipenko intended? Surely he hadn't overlooked this. Well, yeah, he didn't overlook it. He played e5, attacking the rook and threatening bishop f5, winning the queen. Woo! So things are hotting up nicely here. Both players had clearly calculated extremely well. You know, white could just be lost here. But very quickly, Wei Yi played rook d8, pinning the bishop. An exchange. And this is another big moment in the game. King a7 was played, and we'll look at that in a second. But king c7 is a very interesting move. And then white, because let's just come back. Two pieces are attacked. So this has to be played. Now what's going on here? Well, black's king is just too exposed. It should probably end in a draw, but if anyone is risking something, I think black is risking something by trying to play for a win here. For example, check. Don't play queen f7, that could be taken. So if black wants to avoid a draw, king here, now be careful with white because that check is coming to block. But then a4. So the king is safe on a2. In the meantime, once that bishop moves, then the a-pawn is pretty fast. It's not so easy for black to get things going with the e-pawn because the king is so exposed. And it might just be picked off with a check. So I think Esipenko was correct in avoiding that. Even though it should be a draw, it could go badly wrong for black. Instead he played king a7. Now, here is where we're going to have a think and drink moment. White to play. How would you play with white? You have a think, I'll have a drink. Cheers! The only good move here is queen a4. If rook takes c8, queen d1, whoops, rook c8, queen d1 is mate. And if, let's say, bishop c4, then bishop f5 wins the queen. And if you want to try bishop d3 to stop bishop f5, then that blocks the rook. That's very unfortunate, and that's checkmate. So queen a4, only move. Again, I think this was calculated way back. These checks actually don't achieve anything. The king is safe. That's good for white. So the bishop was taken. Now, don't take on c8 because In this case, that's checkmate. But here's the trick. Rook d7 check. Excellent move. That has to be taken, otherwise there's going to be a nasty check. White has just the queen left, but it's a draw by perpetual. Here's where they agree to draw, but you know, queen d6 here, check, and so on. It'll end up in, yeah. But basically the king simply can't escape. You can go back this way, but there is nothing happening. Well, I think a really entertaining game, and strategically very carefully played by both players. They were both alert to the pitfalls in the position. So I think around about here, you know, if anyone has to be careful, I think it's white actually. But when we got to this position, you know, moves like c3, where he understood that he had to make sure that black's any little bit of initiative was neutralized, and he did that very successfully at this point by giving up the pawn on d4, the strong point on d4, but at least eliminating one of the bishops, and then basically he was fine, but only because he calculated very, very well at the end. The other game between the two Uzbeks was also drawn. That was more placid, let's put it like that. So we go into game 2 tomorrow with all to play for. It's going to be very interesting. Thanks for watching.